Temple Mount. We're standing on the Promenade. I told you we'll build it chronologically. We're focusing on the events of the early days with the patriarchs. So we talked about Abraham and Melchizedek, king of Shalem. This was Shalem, where he comes and greets him and gives him the tithing right here in the King's Valley nearby Temple Mount. Then we read in Genesis 22 the challenge, the test, that God challenged him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. We believe traditionally that the actual location of that took place where? Exactly underneath the Golden Dome. The dome, which was built much later in 691, was the location, and I'll show you a picture of how it used to look like. And this is the picture of under the dome. It's called the Dome of the Rock. So this is the rock of foundation, the peak of Mount Moriah. And the Jewish tradition is that on that rock is where Abraham binded Isaac on the altar.
So,
okay?
If you guys want to get a good view, you can walk over here, just, a couple at a time. You can walk over here, you can see it, take a picture, whatever.
700 years after the events, we talked about the Exodus to Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt, 210 years in studying in Egypt. And in 1446 BC is when we believe the date was. How we know about that date, if you want, I'll talk about it later. It's a little more longer explanation. The correlation between two events, a biblical one and an external one, both anchoring in one date, the 625 of Shishak the Pharaoh coming to Israel. And the book of Kings telling us when the temple was built, 4th year to King Solomon, 480 years from the Exodus of Egypt. So if we count on what Kings say as the real count of 488 years, we can backtrack. Solomon ruled from 970 to 930. In his 4th year, he built the temple. That was 966. 966 plus 480 puts you in the middle of the 15th century. Therefore, the date of the Exodus is probably 1446. It's a very big question in research. When was the year of the biblical Exodus? So this is one of the opinions. And if you want, I can elaborate more on that later. 40 years in the desert puts you in 1406. That's when we enter the land of Israel. We talked about it yesterday. Mount Nebo, Moses dying on Mount Nebo, mourning for 30 days in Shittim, crossing River Jordan, taking over Jericho, settling where we were yesterday in Shiloh, an amazing site of Shiloh, where the tabernacle was with the Ark of the Covenant. Shiloh stood for 369 years. So if you make the calculation now, 1406 minus 369 will put you in 1034, which aligns well also with the dates. King David captured the city of Jerusalem in the year 1006 BC, after he ruled for 7.5 years in Hebron. I mentioned before, when King David captured the city, first he goes in the city of David, the Zion, the fortress of Zion, that is talking about in the Bible is not Mount Zion, which we'll be visiting in half an hour. It's the city of Zion, Sion. Jerusalem has 70 names, 70. Sion is one of them. Shalem, Yesenoth, Tzedek, many names. So David captured the city from the Jebusites. We read that in his palace. He buys this Temple Mount, the mountain, Mount Moriah, where Abraham made the offering of Isaac. He buys it for 50 silver coins. That's in the last chapter of the book of Samuel. To set the ground, and then when there's a plague, he makes the offerings there. He makes an actual altar. And when he sacrifices, the actual plague stops. That's Temple Mount. His son Solomon, and this is where we're getting to Temple Mount Israel 1.0. Solomon builds the temple in the year 966. We just told you how we know this. And the temple lasts for 388 years. Solomon dies in 930 BC. His son Rechavam rules after him. And one of the reasons I told you is in the book of Kings, it tells us about Pharaoh Shishak that made a journey from Egypt, stole spoils from the temple. And the Egyptian chronology marks the date 925 BC. The Bible also tells us about Shishak, this journey, year 5 to King Rechavam. And that's the anchor point, how we know to make the calculation of the date. That's so important. After Rechavam, the kingdom splits, the 10 kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. I mentioned to you in the city of David that the 10 tribes were exiled. Tiglat-Pileser, he comes to Samaria, the area of Shiloh, the area of Shomron. 10 tribes are exiled. His successor, Sanherib, king of Assyria, arrives to Judea. He takes some of the Judean cities like Lachish, Azekah, Mareshah, and then he comes to Jerusalem with a force of 185,000 soldiers. King Hezekiah is concerned, but he trusts God. He has a very strong prophet by his side, prophet Isaiah. He doesn't just trust God to say, I'm going to sit and chill in my palace and everything is going to be fine. What he does is, he builds, he fortifies the city, walls, towers, and above all, the water system I showed you in the city of David, we just briefly mentioned it, that takes the water from the spring source to the protected area, mentioned in the book of Chronicles. And then, Isaiah the prophet in chapter 40 says about Sanherib, king of Assyria, he should not come to the city, should not enter it, should not shoot an arrow. The same way he came, he will turn around and go back into the city, he should not enter. And I will protect the city in the name of my name, in the name of David, my follower. And that night, an angel of God went out and struck the Assyrian camp, 185,000 dead. So far, we're talking about the Jewish history of this land. In the year 586 BC is when we read, we saw the burned, we talked about the burned charcoal wood which was found in the city of David. The Babylonians come and destroy the city, burn it in fire, burn Solomon's temple. They do not take the Ark of the Covenant, that we know for sure. Probably King Josiah hid it. Somewhere, I have a theory where it may be, but not right now. Somewhere on the Temple Mount, I believe it's there. 70 years ago to exile, Cyrus the king in 538 allows them to come back to rebuild the second temple after 70 years. By the way, Israel, in the 70th year of Israel, is when you guys, America, moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which is also very symbolic. Many people made this comparison. And Trump's declaration that Jerusalem is our capital. Not that we need anybody to declare that's our capital, it's our capital. Because this has been our capital since the days of King David. Going back to 516, when they built the second temple, the Bible in the book of Ezra describes to us that people were crying. There were older people. If someone was 15 years old when the temple was destroyed and lived to be 85, he saw in his lifetime the first and second temple. And they were crying because the second one was nothing like the first one. Later on it was renovated, expanded, enlarged. The one that Solomon was gold plated, 11 golden candelabras, unbelievable temple. Throughout the years, the temple was enlarged, expanded. You all heard about Hanukkah, Holiday of Lights, also mentioned in the New Testament. That's Hanukkah, where the Jews celebrate the overall defeat of the few against the many Greek that came and desecrated this temple. Not destroyed, but desecrated. They found the oil jar, pure oil jar that lasted for 8 days to light in the holy candelabra. Out of 8 battles, 4 they won, 4 they lost, but ultimately they won the war, purified the temple, establishing 100 years of Hasmonean dynasty autonomy in Jerusalem. Roman Pompey, 63 BC, comes to Jerusalem due to argument between two Hasmonean brothers. He arrives here. 20 years later, Herod the Great is appointed, 37 BC. He's appointed to be the king of Israel, rules until -4. -4 is a very important year because who was born in -4? Jesus. He's not born in the year 0. Many people think that the count is from the birth of Christ. Therefore, we're supposed to be today in 2023, I guess. I know how they miscalculated that. But Jesus is born in -4. We talked about on the bus also about the famous massacre of the children in Bethlehem. Herod gave the order. Herod dies the same year Jesus is born. Okay? And Jesus' last year in Jerusalem, and that's what we're going to be focusing this afternoon, is in the year 30. When he's crucified, we're going to go after lunch to the upper room, Gethsemane, Via Dolorosa, the church of Holy Sepulchre, where he was crucified, buried, and resurrected, and also the alternative place of Garden Tomb, so you can see both of them and we can discuss both of them. So we'll put that aside in a second because we're going to focus on this all this afternoon. And I want to lead back to the Muslim period over here. After the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70, Jews were not allowed to have any kind of formal thing here. We lost our sovereignty. 60 years later, we tried to re-establish it with the second revolt of Bar Kokhba, failed as well. The Bar Kokhba revolt. And after the Romans, the Byzantines came. Helene, the mother of Constantine, she's the one that came and identified the holy sites and built a church of the Holy Sepulchre. And after 300 years, the Muslims arrived to Jerusalem. Muhammad is born in the year 570 in Arabia and dies in 632. Jerusalem is captured in 638, 6 years after Muhammad died. When we talk about Jerusalem in the Quran, Jerusalem is considered to be the third holiest city in Islam, after Mecca and after Medina. How many times though it's mentioned in the Quran? Quran is the holy Muslim book. So we would expect at least once or twice, if it's the third holiest place, well, surprisingly not even once. The name Jerusalem, in 114 chapters of the Quran, I read all of them, the name Jerusalem is not mentioned. What is mentioned is in chapter 17 in the Quran, where it says, blessed is he, God, who brought his holy follower, referring to Muhammad, from the holy mosque refers to the mosque in Mecca, to the mosque of Al-Aqsa. What is the name of this mosque with the black dome? Al-Aqsa, the furthest. In Arabic it means furthest, most extreme. The interpretation of that verse is that Muhammad, in a night journey, and by the way, even the Muslim Hadith, the interpretation of the Quran, talks about the night journey as being a vision, a dream. Not a physical journey of Muhammad visiting here, because physically he was never here. In spirit he traveled, in his vision, in a dream. Angel Gabriel took him on El Burak, the miraculous horse with wings. He flew on that Burak, came to what they believe is Jerusalem, ascended to heaven to receive the 5 prayers of Islam, 5 prayers a day, flew back, and Aisha, his wife, testifies that Muhammad's body was present physically. He only traveled in spirit. A vision, a night dream. That is the connection to Jerusalem in the Quran. In the year 638, the third Caliph after Muhammad, Abu Bakr, the third one was Omar ibn al-Khattab, comes to Jerusalem, captures the city from the hands of the Byzantine Christians, and then he asks the Byzantine Christians, what is the holiest site in Jerusalem? The Byzantine Christians take him where?
Temple Mount.
No, not the Temple Mount. To the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Because the Christians, for them, the holiest site in Jerusalem was the site where Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected, right? Omar says, this is not the place Muhammad described to me. Remember this because we're going to be there this afternoon. I'll show you the mosque that was built just opposite the church to commemorate the visit of Omar, the Mosque of Omar. Who showed him the place? A Jew. A Jewish person, his name was Kabil Akhbar, that converted to Islam, takes Omar hand by hand, tells him, come with me, I'll show you the place. He takes him where this time? To the Temple Mount, to this huge, magnificent plaza. The size of the plaza of Temple Mount is huge, 1.4 million square foot.
Wow.
12 soccer fields, 6 football fields. It's massive, okay? And now the question is, where on Temple Mount should I build a mosque? Right? So, Kabil Akhbar, the Jew, showed Omar the holy site under the stone were believed to be the place of the foundation stone, Abraham offering Isaac, first and second temple. And he says, look, I suggest if Temple Mount is between Pastor Ron and Pastor Jim and myself, right, the rectangle, let's say that over here is the holy site. He says, look, build a mosque here in the north. This way you'll be able to pray south towards Mecca. and also in the direction to the foundation stone. Omar says, no, my friend, you're looking at this from a Jewish perspective. I will emphasize the direction of prayer is towards Mecca by building the mosque in the extreme south. And there Omar goes and builds a small little wooden mosque where Ron and Jim are sitting over there. That's the mosque. And they're praying with their back towards the foundation stone, and of course with the face towards Mecca. The mosque was located in the southern part, where now you see the great dome just in front of you. This was the one in 638. And now it gets interesting. In the year 691, there is a Muslim Khalif by the name of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. And this Abd al-Malik says to himself, it can be possible that we, the Muslims, are now in control of Jerusalem, and the most beautiful building in Jerusalem is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We have to build a nicer building, and he builds the beautiful octagonal Dome of the Rock. That's the building that you're actually seeing right over there. Okay, that's the octagonal building of the Dome of the Rock. Okay, come on, Joseph. So you can see here the dome, that's a cut through the Dome of the Rock. As you can see, it was built as a monumental building. It's not a mosque because the mosque is in the southern part where they pray towards Mecca. In the year 705, the son of Abd al-Malik, his name was Al-Walid, knocks down the wooden mosque that Omar built in the southern section, and instead of it he builds a nicer, bigger stone mosque. I'll show you a picture of how it used to look like in the Muslim period. We have here the layout during the Umayyad dynasty. You take a look at this. This is the picture where you see the four palaces. And you can see the mosque that Abd al-Malik, the Dome of the Rock that Abd al-Malik built, the Golden Dome, and the stone mosque, Al-Aqsa. This is the original one built by his son Al-Walid the builder. That's a picture from the 8th century, the early 8th century, the Umayyad dynasty. In the year 749, there was a massive earthquake that also destroyed the city of Bet Shean, where we had lunch yesterday. And that earthquake knocked down the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. It collapsed down to the ground. Dome of the Rock stayed untouched, nothing happened to it. Al-Aqsa Mosque was rebuilt. In the year 1033, again another massive earthquake. Again, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the rebuilt one, collapsed. Dome of the Rock stayed untouched, nothing happened to it. Any idea why? There's only 600 feet between the dome and between the mosque. How come Al-Aqsa Mosque fell in 2 earthquakes and the Dome of the Rock withstood both of them? Any ideas?
Dome was built on the rock.
True. On this rock, right? The rock is solid.
Yeah.
Think of Peter. So exactly, that's the answer. The dome is built on the rock, but moreover, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's not built on the rock, it's built on the filling. Mm-hmm. If the Temple Mount, if this is the peak, and that's the rock, and here it's sloping down, that's the southern wall, the western wall, all of this area where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built is all hollow, arches and filling. So it's a lot more vulnerable to earthquakes.
Right.
And that's why it was destroyed twice in big earthquakes, and the Dome of the Rock withstood both of them. Who knows who arrives to Israel in the year 1099? In 1009, 9 years before that,
Pope Urban?
there was Pope Urban and the Crusaders. He came a little later. Urban II. Urban II is the Pope. He didn't arrive to Israel, but he gave his speech in Killerman, France in 1095, encouraging the Crusaders to go and to fight for the redemption of Jerusalem from the desecration of the churches. After in 1009, Al-Hakim Be'ima Allah destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And in 1099, 4 years later, the Crusaders arrived. We'll talk about the Crusaders as well. And they destroyed. The population of Jerusalem was Muslim and Jewish, fighting alongside. Jews and Muslims fighting together against the Christian Crusaders. The Crusaders were massacring also Jewish communities on the way to Terre the Holy Land. When the Crusaders came to Temple Mount, they saw two buildings. They saw what you see in front of you, the great dome of El-Aqsa, and they also saw the Dome of the Rock. They thought, I don't know if they really thought or that's how they referred to it, they said, well, we know about the existence of two temples. Solomon's temple, first temple, and Herod's temple, the temple that Jesus visited. So they called the Dome of the Rock Templus Domini, our Lord's temple, from the days of Jesus, and they called the southern one Templus Solomonis, Solomon's temple. So what is the first one? What is the second one? I don't know if they really thought, because this one was built 40 years before they arrived. It was a brand new building. Hard to imagine they thought it's Solomon's building, which is from their time 2,000 years old. Okay, but that's how they refer to it. Just to understand something in terms of the politics, and again, we're talking back and forth, but I want to reach to 1967. And with this to summarize our experience here. When we talk about the events here, after the Crusaders came, Salah ad-Din, the Ayyubian, was able to take them out. After Salah ad-Din took them out, the Ayyubians were here. Then the Mamluks. After the Mamluks, the Ottoman Turks. Finding what I need for you guys. Yeah, I found it. Perfect. The Ottoman Turks, and they ruled here for 400 years. I'm not going to go into details right now. We spoke about it on the bus yesterday on the way here, but we talked about the whole background of the British and the French in 1917, and Lawrence of Arabia and Gertrude Bell. That's the link I sent you, by the way, today if you have the chance. See that movie. It's a great movie and a good story. The Balfour Declaration, the British being here for 30 years, and the struggle for independence. In 1948, Israel had to fight because the partition plan, which was voted in New York, was rejected. The British has decided to leave after we lightly encouraged them, also with what we did in the King David Hotel on July 22nd, 1946. The British termination of the British Mayor was May 15, 1948, Shabbat. Happened to be the day of Shabbat. And Israel could not proclaim its independence on Shabbat, even though most of the leaders were not religious, but still were very traditional. So they early the ceremony in 24 hours. We may talk about it in Tel Aviv on Sunday. They called in the ceremony. And why did they proclaim it in Tel Aviv? Why not in Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem was in the midst of the war. It was fighting door to door in between the streets here. They declared Israel's independence in Tel Aviv in Rosh 16. The war goes on. Egypt invades Syria, Lebanon, Iraqi forces, Jordanians, and the local Arabs here. The war ends. Israel enlarges the borders, but Jerusalem stays in the Jordanian hands. The Jordanians invaded with their Arab legion, Abdallah Atal, under the King Abdallah. They set up a border line, an armistice line of 7.5 kilometers, 5 miles, in between the Jordanian positions and the Israeli positions. The Jordanians blow up the Jewish quarter. That synagogue was blown up in 1948. Another synagogue, if you lean down, you can see through the window, there's a huge synagogue with a white dome. You see it better from your angle? Yeah. That was called the Churva synagogue, blown up by the Jordanians in 48. Recently rebuilt, 15 years ago. Okay? There was a big yeshiva over here, Tiferet Yisrael, blown up. The Jordanians destroyed the Jewish quarter. 2,000 people were exiled back to Israel. And about 70 people were taken to be prisoners in Mayfrak in Jordan. You know where that is. One of my friends was there as well. He died 2 years ago in the age of 92. He fought here in the Jewish quarter. So the Jewish quarter, Old City, Temple Mount, Western Wall, was out of our hands for 19 years. In 1967, is when we talked about the 16th war, both in the Golan, both yesterday in Shiloh. King Hussein of Jordan was tricked to join in the war by Jamal Abdel Nasser. Remember I told you about that phone call? When they told him, brother, we're at war, the Israeli Air Force is destroyed, and the Egyptian army is just outside of Tel Aviv. Relying on this false information, who sent Rush to join the war. He joined the war, and Israel inevitably engaged war with Jordan. What happens next is astonishing. Israel takes over big parts of the West Bank, and by the third day, Israeli forces are standing on the ridge across that Mount of Olives. You see that tower and the 7 arches, Intercontinental Hotel. I happen to have with me here a picture of the commander of the Jerusalem Brigade, Mordechai Motagur. This picture was taken from there, from that ridge. He's speaking on the military radio, right over there, about to breach and take over the Temple Mount. And then, if you have your whispers on, I'll play it, you can hear it better. I have with me the original recording of the military communication of Mordechai Motagur speaking, and this is what he says. Listen to this. You hear? Can you now?
Yeah.
We are sitting on the ridge that overlooks the old city. And soon we're about to enter it. The old city of Jerusalem, that for generations we've been dreaming about and hoping to come back to. We will be the first ones to enter. Now he gives the military command. The tanks of Eitan will proceed left and enter the Lion's Gate. Move out to the gate. Victory parade will take place up on the plaza. And they run like lions, enter through, and then you hear these words on the radio. Temple Mount is in our hands. Temple Mount is in our hands. Kol hakavod.
Wow.
This is the radio communication of that morning of June 7, 1967. And I want to end this presentation by asking a question which we don't necessarily have an answer. Is the Temple Mount in our hands, as they said? Because the Temple Mount is one of the most high contested real estate in the world. Probably the most.
Yeah.
This 1.4 million square foot. We had the Jewish temple, the first and second. And when the Muslims built the mosque of Al-Aqsa, the Dome of the Rock, in the 7th century, until today, and what's going on in the situation today, is probably one of the most difficult issues and challenges to solve here. Right after the war, and right after that Moshe Dayan had control, and again, it was, in my opinion, a stupid mistake. He didn't see that suddenly God gives you something on a silver platter, you have to know what to do with it.
Right.
He was afraid that the nations are not going to tolerate Jewish control of Temple Mount, and the Muslim world would not tolerate that, even though we were the victors. He called in the Waqf, the Muslim authority, and he tells them, come, take the keys, you're back in control. We have security here, but you can keep on running the affairs. And that's exactly what happened. Not that I'm saying, God forbid, that we have to destroy anything up there, but at least should open the place to access to all religions. As Prophet Isaiah says, my house will be a house of prayer to all nations. And today we want to pray up there. Christians, Jews, we can't pray there. We can go as visitors, as tourists, but the prayers taking place are only the Muslim prayers. So it's a very difficult situation, very complex, but we understand that from here, both the historical perspective, the events that happened, how we came back to our hands in 67, what we know for sure is one thing. When Messiah will come to walk this land in Jerusalem, he will be here. He will come from Mount of Olives. Zechariah 14, his feet will stand on Mount of Olives. There's going to be a big war. And eventually everything will settle. There will be peace. The Lamb will be dwelling together with the wolf. And the kingdom of David will be restored here. And then the words of Isaiah, my house will be a house of nation, a house of prayer to all nations. So this is where you are. You're sitting between a synagogue, a church, a mosque, in 1 square kilometer of the 4 quarters in Jerusalem, overlooking Temple Mount, overlooking Mount of Olives, in one of the most incredible sites probably in the world, in terms of the location of where we are. We are in the middle of our day learning and walking in the footsteps of the Bible, our fathers, our kings, our prophets, and the next couple of hours in the footsteps of Jesus. From here, after we settle here in the little restaurant, we're going to go straight to the upper room. And we're going to follow, even with Jesus, we'll follow the sequence of the events from the upper room, the Passover meal, to the walk. We'll probably drive it to the Garden of Gethsemane. We'll go to the garden, and from the garden, we'll go in the footsteps of Jesus to the place of the trial on the Tonian fortress and the crucifixion in two options. Any questions?